Hello. If you and I are working together in symbolic logic, then what you're seeing on your screen, on the left-hand side of your screen, is the proof completion exercise from our third exam. So what we're doing here, if you and I are not working together, is filling in the citations and justifications for each inference in our proof. So you'll notice that we have three premises, lines 1, 2, and 3, that were given to us. And then from lines 4 through 11, we have employed a structuring subproof. The nested subproof sequence, I should be more specific, because it's not just one subproof, it's a sequence of two successive subproofs, goes from lines 6 through 8 and 9 through 10. Okay, so what I'm going to do first is review what our givens are, and then talk about the strategy employed. So our first line is a biconditional. Our second line is governed by a conditional. The subconnective is the disjunction, and the subconnective is the negation. The negation scope covers just the sentence cube B. Then at line 3, the connective is a negation. So remember some of our tactics, namely, when you're given a biconditional, you want to think about disassembling it. That is, affirming the left side or the right side so as to eliminate the biconditional. If you're given a conditional, your tactic is to break it up, that is, to eliminate it by affirming the left side, that is, affirming the antecedent, thereby inferring the right side. So we eliminate the conditional. And then when we have a negation, we want to think about finding a contradiction. So take a look at line 3 and noticing that the sentence says not cube C. So look for cube C in your premises. Do you see it anywhere? Yes, you do. You see it nested in deep within the conditional at line 2. Right, here's cube C. So cube C and not cube C are contradictories, but in order to make that claim, you have to get cube C on its own in a sequence. Notice also that there is an implicit contradiction between not cube B at line 2 and cube B at line 1. Then lastly, the conclusion is not cube A. Recall our strategy. When your conclusion is a negated sentence, more specifically, when your conclusion is a literal, a negated atomic sentence, you're going to set up negation introduction, which involves assuming that your conclusion is false. In other words, you assume that cube A is true. From that assumption, you generate a contradiction so that you can exit the subproof and introduce the negation. Let's continue to work backward. Line 11 is the contradiction, right? Well, you know that you're going to want to achieve a contradiction. The question is, how are you going to do that? Well, we've already found two implicit contradictions that need to be made explicit. In addition, if we run back up to line 2, we notice that we have, once we dismantle the conditional at line 2, we have a disjunction, and we know that when we're given a disjunction, we set up disjunction elimination. So notice at line 5, we're told that the disjunction has been inferred, And then we see that starting at line 6, running through line 8, then beginning at line 9 and running through line 10, we have 2 successive subproofs using disjunction elimination. So what we're saying is this. At line 5, we have a disjunction. So we set up disjunction elimination with the contradiction that we want to achieve at line 11 as our goal in each of the successive subproofs. So first we assume the left side of the disjunction at line 5, generate a contradiction, then assume the right side of the disjunction at line 5 and infer a contradiction, so we can exit the subproof and say from lines 5, 6 to 8, and 9 to 10, by disjunction elimination, we have inferred a contradiction. Now we've got a few spaces to fill in, right? We need to justify line 5 and cite the line number or numbers from which line 5 was derived. We need to do the same for 7, 8, and 10. Let's start with line 5. Line 5, as you recall, is the consequent of the conditional claim at line 2. We know that the conditional claim is dismantled by affirming the antecedent, which we have at line 4. So lines 2 and 4, by way of conditional elimination, gets us line 5. Let's check the step. We're correct. Now we've got the first of our 2 successive subproofs that we inaugurated once we achieved line 5. On the assumption that it's not the case that we have cube B, what follows? Well, as we know, we want a contradiction, right? That's how line 8 ends, or that's how the subproof, the nested subproof ends. So we're going to now make explicit the contradiction by the following method. Line 7 comes from lines 1 and 4 by way of biconditional elimination. Let's check our success, and we get the green light, as it were. Now at line 8, we express the contradiction of, or between, lines 6 and 7. That is, we introduce the contradiction. Again, another check mark. Moving on to the second half of our 2-part disjunction elimination subproof sequence, we assume cube C, and we notice that what we haven't used as yet is line 3, and lines 3 and 9 are contradictories. We assert the contradiction again by way of contradiction intro, and we check our step. Now let's check our steps for line 11, which we've already filled in, right? We've already cited and asserted the justification. Let's check it. We're correct. And the same with line 12. We're correct. Now, since I didn't assert a goal, I'm not going to verify the proof, but we have successfully derived the conclusion. So that was our first proof exercise, the proof completion exercise. Now let's move on to the first of our 2 proof construction and completion exercises. So here the task is to exhibit your strategic and tactical thinking skills. Take a look at our conclusion. Our conclusion says, if D then A. We know that our strategy, when our conclusion is a conditional claim, to set up conditional introduction, whereby we assume the antecedent, derive the consequent, then exit the subproof, and assert that we've just proven that if we have D, then we have A. We select the entire subproof sequence. Now, if you were working this exam, you know you worked it by hand, but the principle still applies, namely, your citation involves the entire subproof. Right now, we've got some placeholders, so the line numbers are going to change, but here in Fitch, we've selected for the moment lines 3 to 6. And we're saying that this inference at currently line 7, is justified by conditional intro. Now, let's take a look at what we're given and see what sort of moves we're going to want to make in order to achieve our conclusion. Our first premise says, if not A, then both B and C. Our second premise says, if D, then not C. Two things should jump out at you. One is that both premise 1 and premise 2 involve conditional claims, and a tactic you want to think about employing whenever you see a conditional claim given is eliminate. That is, disassemble the conditional. How do you disassemble the conditional? Affirm the antecedent, thereby deriving the consequent. The second note is on the implicit contradiction. Specifically, we have not C and C. Lastly, notice that the conclusion of our structuring subproof is A. A implicitly contradicts the antecedent of line 1. So we're going to think about deriving A by generating a contradiction between some sentence and another, so that we can get out of the sequence and say it's not the case that not A. In other words, we're going, by working backward from line 6, what is currently line 6, but I'm going to delete some lines. We're going to work backward, and immediately after line 3, generate a second subproof that is a nested subproof. We're going to assume not A, derive a contradiction, so that we can exit the subproof and say that, therefore, the assumption not A is false. Now, technically, we introduce a second negation, and then from that, we eliminate the two negations. You probably already know from your experience in Fitch, however, that you can move from the contradiction to the affirmed sentence A. Fitch allows you to do that. But let's not. Why? Let's just make sure that we're explicit, we're very clear about what we've just done. Specifically, once we generate the contradiction that tells us that line 4 can't be the case, technically, we introduce a second negation, which we then eliminate. So since I know that this is the plan, I'm going to highlight line 7 and say that the inference to line 8 is justified by negation elim. I'm going to, at what is currently line 7, highlight the nested subproof sequence begun at line 4, and I'm going to say that line 7 in this case, or so far it's line 7, is justified by negation intro. All right, let's go in and fill in our steps. We've got a couple of moves we can make. Let me point your attention to the following. Lines 1 and 4 get you the conjunction B and C, right? Conditional elimination from lines 1 and 4 gets you B conjunction C. Alternatively, you can say that lines 2 and 3 get you not C. Whichever you choose to do first is entirely up to you. Why? Because either move is legal. In other words, there is no forced order for the inference at line 5. So what I'm going to do, since I've already got lines 2 and 3 highlighted, is this. I'm going to infer not C. My justification is the elimination of the conditional at line 2 by the affirmation of the antecedent at line 3. Going to make another inferential step to the sentence B conjunction C. That is inferred from lines 1 and 4. The justificatory rule is the elimination of the conditional at line 1 by the affirmation of the antecedent at line 4. And now I'm in a position to make my contradiction explicit by inferring from line 6, line 7, by the elimination of the conjunction. This is a tactical move insofar as when you're given a conjunction, most often you're going to dismantle it by conjunction elim, but it is a tactical move also with an eye toward the contradiction that you are looking to generate, in this case at line 8. 5 and 7, contradiction intro, give you 8. Now let me go ahead and make the font size a little smaller so that we can get everything on in a single shot. And in this case, I did go ahead and fill in the goal. Notice that we've cited and justified each one of the lines that we've used in order to make the inference, as well as the justificatory rule applied. So I'm going to, instead of checking each step, I'm going to verify the proof, and we get check marks. Okay, we're ready to move on to the last of the exercises in the exam. I'm going to show the step numbers, and let's once again talk strategy. Notice that your first premise has two connectives, the governing one of which is the arrow. You have a disjunction as the subconnective in line number 1. So it's very likely you're going to have to eliminate it. Notice too at line 2, you have a conjunction of two negations. And each of those negations implicitly contradicts each side of the disjunction at line 1. So that's going to come in handy as we move forward. Notice also that your conclusion is a negation. Remember, when your conclusion is an atomic sentence, a literal, or a negated sentence, well, any sentence at all can be, of a valid argument, can be proven by negation intro, but remember, we're talking strategy here. When you have a negated sentence, an atomic sentence, or a literal, your strategy should be negation intro. That means assume your conclusion is false, which is to say assume A is true, derive a contradiction so that you can exit the subproof and infer that your assumption A is not the case because it generated a contradiction. Once we have A, we're now in a position to start dismantling. Notice that lines 1 and 3 yield B disjunction C by conditional elim. Once you've got your disjunction, it should be clear that in order to generate your contradiction at line 6, you're going to need to eliminate your disjunction at line 4 and generate a contradiction for each side. So let me clean up the lines. Going to start the first of 2 nested subproofs. First, assuming B, generating a contradiction, exiting the first subproof sequence, starting the second subproof sequence, from that inferring a contradiction so that I can get out of the disjunction elimination subproof and say, look, from lines 4, 5 to 7, 8 to 10, I generated a contradiction. So in either case, at line 11, I have a contradiction. Okay, so we've got our blueprint. Now let's connect the dots. If we have B and we're looking to generate a contradiction, let's look no further than line 2. We can eliminate the conjunction, that is, dismantle the conjunction, and then assert the contradiction. Once we're done with the first of our 2 subproof sequences for the disjunction elimination subproof beginning at line 4, we're ready to move on. Sorry, I hit a button and created a line I didn't want. Okay, so we assume C. We're going to dismantle the right side of the conjunction at line 2, eliminate the conjunction, and get thereby not C. And then line 10 is an assertion of the contradiction that I articulated at jointly lines 8 and 9. Let me go ahead and make sure that the entire sequence is showing up in a single screen. So there we go. All right, now I'm almost in a position to verify my proof. Do you remember how we set up our structuring subproof? Lines 3 through 11, negation intro. Verify our proof, and we're getting an X. Let's find out why. Oh, I see. Oopsie. I didn't, I thought I typed a B, but maybe I didn't. All right, let's try this again. Verify. And apparently somehow in the mix, I unhighlighted the subproof. All right. Click, and let me make sure everything shows up on a single, in a single shot. It does. Let's verify our proof. Sorry, I thought I highlighted it. I thought I highlighted the subproof sequence, but apparently I didn't. Thank you, Fitch. Okay, so as you can see, after fixing the little hiccups, we've got check marks on every line and our goal checks out. So I hope that this tutorial is helpful to you, whether you were writing the exam that we took, or you're just learning language proof and logic. You're learning the deductive system presented in that text. Obviously, the video is created specifically for the folks writing the exam. Please let me know if you have questions, problems, confusions. But it should be the case that as you're working through with me in this video these exercises, you're more comfortable than you were maybe in the exam. Certainly more comfortable than when we first started talking about this material, with the idea of using structuring subproofs and nested subproofs to provide you with a blueprint that you can fill in with tactical moves.